Today, a federal report shows inflation barely rose last month, a sign that pressures on prices cooled slightly after 2 months of sharp gains. The Commerce Department reported that prices went up just 1/10 of a percentage point from October to November.
Now, since we're less than 2 weeks from a new year beginning, we wanted to bring in a local economic expert about his predictions for where things could go and share some insight about that. So today we're joined in studio by Edward Anderson. He's a professor of supply chain and operations management at the University of Texas, just down the street from us. Professor, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Will and Avery. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, your insight will be very valuable for what we're going to ask you today. So, of course, everyone knows Donald Trump is going to be entering the White House again and begin a new administration just next month. But he is calling for import tariffs for some of our biggest trading partners, namely Canada, Mexico, and China. Based on your studies, what do you think the impact that will have on Americans out there?
It's going to be huge, and particularly with respect to Austin. So, yeah, as you said, the forecast for inflation doesn't look so bad, but it's not accounting for these things. In particular, if we start getting into a tariff and trade war, we've already got the fact that China, as in reaction to the proposed tariffs, is banned certain classes of critical minerals from coming from the U.S., which is hindering our ability to produce electronics, wind turbines, and EVs as well. And then oddly enough, defense production, shells, things like that as well. And that's likely to continue because they make the bulk of the world's critical minerals. And so we're at their mercy to some extent. Canada and Mexico, we don't think about much, but really we're an economic unit with them. And we have been since the 90s. And in some ways, economically, we're one country. And so if you look at things like automotives, the parts, as you build up an automotive, cross the border, it's estimated 8 times. Okay, between Mexico and the US or Canada or US or both. And so once that happens, we may not, cars at the least are going to become way more expensive, right? And on top of that, we've got wage issues with the UAW that are increasing prices. And so that's going to be a real problem. In addition to that, if we do have stoppages, oh yeah, Austin makes a lot of the chips that goes into automotives.
Right, a growing industry here.
Right, and to some extent, SAP, we don't think about it much, but that's a huge effect on Austin. So, yeah, those are the major issues that we have to deal with. But there's a lot of little knock-on effects, like we've got conflict now with EU coming up, which not as bad, but that'll have problems too.
You mentioned, wage issues. I think a lot of people have been focused on strikes and how those are affecting these various industries. Right. Talk about that. What are you all watching most closely as it relates to how strikes, particularly at the ports, will affect supply chain?
Yeah. So strikes in general, interesting enough, on some measures are up about 3x since the 2010s, which probably has to do with the fact we got a labor shortage in the U.S. But yeah, the strike at the eastern and Gulf Coast ports are really, really concerning. So we had 3 days of chaos in October.
Right.
And you know what, though? Only a provisional agreement was made. And so in January, that provisional agreement is going to expire. Right now, it looks like there actually is going to be a strike. And once you have a strike, it's going to cost the country, depending, $500 million to $5 billion a day. And for every day the strikes occur, it takes 2 days to unwind, and gets worse the longer it is. First thing we'll notice is, by the way, Houston's one of those ports too.
Right.
And first thing we'll notice is that produce is going to start becoming very scarce very quickly, particularly things like berries, but all sorts of stuff that comes from South America and Central America. For myself, I'm already starting to stock up on pineapple. But
That's
bananas
one of your
too,
favorites, yeah.
but actually almost everything that has to do with respect to produce.
Well, we may have to have you back in January once that potential agreement falls through, or what the impacts of it might be. So we'll be tracking that too and keep our pulse on that. Quickly, in the last maybe minute or so that we have you, some of your study focuses on software engineering in particular. What are the issues you're seeing there that could have impacts for people at home?
Right. So in Austin, we have a lot of people who are software engineers. There's a lot of software engineers that have work already. And the problem is that AI is starting to come into play right now. And it's starting to have some effect. And I hate to say this, but we don't know. It might have a lot of effect. And in that case, are those software engineers ever going to get employed again? And that is going to be hanging with us, not just in 2025, but for the foreseeable future.
Professor Edward Anderson, such good insight and things to watch. We know we'll be checking in with you again, especially as some of these things continue to develop. But thank you so much for joining us today to give us a look ahead at what to brace for in the coming year.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you.
Appreciate it.
We'll be back after the break.